part of this opportunity. So we need companies like Ripple to exist and to, fight the good fight to move this thinking forward, because there are tremendous economic opportunities at hand here.
Springing off the subject of blockchains, how do you feel about cryptocurrencies? Are you of the Warren Buffett camp, or sort of the Tim Draper camp, the big advocates of it, somewhere in between?
Well, for me on crypto, it's a little different story. I think I love the promise, and by the way, I think cryptocurrency as a bridge currency is perhaps one of the best first use cases we should try to push to get to critical mass or get out there. I think it works great in that regard. I could see that working very, very nicely to sort of become a lubricant in the flywheel of a cross-border trade business as complex as eBay's. It could be very, very interesting. But what's happening with crypto, that is both a natural occurrence, but it's also a bit of the challenge, is the brand, right? I mean, Ripple faces a challenge with XRP, Bitcoin faces it, Ethereum, and there's still not a sufficient understanding of the purpose, the value, the capability of cryptocurrency. What everybody gets distracted by is the volatility of the value of that currency in these markets. And because there was, and still is, such a large number of global participants in what I would call sort of the opportunistic side of, trading on the value of these currencies, we're losing the plot before we've even, finished shooting the movie. And so I think, one of the things that needs to happen is, companies that are in this space need to take a big step back and invest in correctly positioning the importance of crypto, and in a sense, sort of recasting the role that it's going to play in the future of things like payments and commerce and banking at large, because the fits and starts aren't helping. At the same time, like I said, this is not uncommon when you're breaking new ground and you're completely changing the rules of the game, trying to move something forward in a very disruptive fashion. This is bound to happen. We've seen it in all industries, from the auto industry to even first generation of the web. There was a lot of glass that was broken along the way, but it's also very easy to get that cart before the horse, and it's important that some efforts happen here where we really step back and retrench, and then activate some really great examples of crypto, working in the way that sort of eschews those risks and those volatility risks and stability risks that people are pointing to. And that's why I think potentially, if we get to the right liquidity someplace, that a bridge currency application for crypto is a good starting point.
So we've got just over 5 minutes left. I'd like to turn over the floor to a couple questions in just a minute. But first, I also want to ask you, there's another online marketplace that's kind of gone whole hog into blockchain lately, and that's Overstock.com, an eBay rival. What do you make of their approach to this new world?
Courageous. So as an entrepreneur, I don't fault them at all. I think, boy, that took some grit. As a public company, sitting, where I was sitting in the last 5 years, and even back at Apple running e-commerce there are levels of disruption you can push. There are elements of your company's financial architecture that you can change, but it's nowhere near as easy as a startup company when you're starting with a clean sheet of paper. There are many, many expectations that have to be managed and customers you have to roll through. So what Overstock was trying to do is the kind of thing you would expect in a startup company, private company, venture-backed, and they're doing it out there in the open in a very bold and courageous way. I think they're facing the same problems, and one of the first things we saw come out of Overstock, which is great for us to watch, as an e-commerce player a few years ago, is accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment. Great, bold, interesting. Love to see how that plays out. And sure enough, you can see that the volatility of the currency could make it very hard for a retailer or a commerce player to know if they just sold an iPhone for $10,000 or 50 cents, because
by the time you buy 2 pizzas, it's worth tens of millions of dollars.
Exactly. And so the consumer proposition, and it was so early, there are industry people who could intuit the concept of Bitcoin, but the vast majority of mere mortal consumers, like, this is way over their head. So it's the other part of this when I talk about re-educating on the currency for the industry and crypto. I think the same has to be done for consumers. Like, why does this even matter as a consumer? I'm just trying to get a new pair of socks, and like I gotta, work a market here, and I gotta look at what my dollar is going to convert to in Bitcoin and why. That can all be answered, but everybody's sort of running towards the solution, before we've kind of stepped back and said why we're doing this and how are consumers really going to rationalize this mode. And so this is, in some ways, I think you can credit Overstock for starting to move us forward, but I think at the same time they created another challenge by, again, maybe putting a little bit of concern in consumers' mindsets about, the volatility of a currency, and then maybe just associating this whole blockchain and this whole crypto thing with kind of the price of Bitcoin as their consideration factor for whether they're going to participate as a consumer or not. And that's unfortunate because it's clearly, there's a much bigger proposition here, but I think it's the job of the commerce players to really simplify that and make an immediate walk-up usability sort of value proposition that any of us in the room would just sort of look at and go, wow, that's an extraordinarily better experience and better value for me as a shopper. Okay, I'm going to give it a try. Risk-free, money-back guarantee, great, why not? And I haven't seen anybody really go all in quite that way yet for the consumer. I think that's next.
So our time is running out. I want to make sure we squeeze in at least one question if we keep it tight. How about you up front?
Following up on what President Clinton said and what you just said about the importance of thinking strategically and inclusively, and I'm really impressed with your background, how do you think we can use blockchain and what Ripple has created to more efficiently and effectively include the bottom rung of the world society? Have you thought about that?
So yeah, if we can keep it to maybe a minute in response, how can blockchains create more economic opportunity and inclusion globally?
Sure. Well, I have some long-range thoughts on this. I'll try to shorten it as best I can. You think about the point of view of eBay, which I think is just one of the greatest purpose-driven companies out there with a single mission, which is to create economic empowerment for everyone. Everybody in this world has something to sell or something of value. And why can't we create liquidity for them? Whether it's here in Silicon Valley or in a village in India or in a rural area in China, it should all be one-click accessible, right? And they should be able to trade. And today it's too hard, especially if you're unbanked. And so as I was starting to talk a little bit about my interest in this interledger protocol and ILP, the idea that maybe people could start doing true point-to-point transactions where there doesn't need to be a central processing facility. And could currency just be moved literally point-to-point versus a debit and a credit, that's being reflected in a banking institution? Maybe. And maybe the financial services and these banks actually are the ones, creating these ledgers and managing this system in sort of a bankless way. Absolutely. My view is this is all about making the technology so powerful that it simplifies access and simplifies engagement for literally everyone. And I've seen the beginnings of this with some of these inroads we've made in these 190 countries during my time at eBay, and the appetite for it is massive. I'll just mention quickly in China, all of the growth in China's e-commerce that's fueling this 30, 40% growth year on year isn't coming from Shanghai, Beijing. It's coming from those rural areas where they don't even have internet connectivity until now. And it's completely transformed these farmers' lives in these communities, and they're just scratching the surface of penetration. And so I think this is a big opportunity for us, and maybe it's our responsibility, frankly, to get after this.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. You know, you've had a tremendous career, and it sounds like there's a ton of disruption underway. We all better keep our eye on the ball.
Thanks, Robert. Great to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.